Ever wonder why, despite following a strict diet, you're still reacting to new foods? Or do you react to a lot of foods and you'd like to change that? Today we're going to dive into the world of oral tolerance, the key to changing food sensitivities. So stay with us and discover how to regain control of your health.
Welcome to the Hashimoto's Doctor Podcast. You're now part of a growing community of people determined to take their health back through education and self-empowerment. But because of the healthcare system today, we don't have access to the types of healthcare that we want. So we have to do things differently. We've got to do things smarter, and we do that by becoming our own advocates. This podcast will give you the perspective and thoughts of one of the world's leading Hashimoto's doctors. So let's get started.
Welcome back to the Hashimoto's Doctor Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Shook, and today we're going to be talking about something that most people have never heard of. And this is really important if you have food sensitivities or, if you have an autoimmune condition. One of the problems that occurs is that you tend to lose tolerance, meaning your immune system doesn't tolerate some of the foods that you eat, and that can drive an inflammatory response that could perpetuate or activate the immune system and drive and trigger autoimmunity. Now, some people that are autoimmune, and I've seen this happen with the people I work with, they'll go on a strict diet. Let's say it's an elimination style diet. And they do that because we know that certain dietary strategies tend to remove a lot of the foods that tend to be reactive. And when they remove those foods, they feel better. In general, most people do. But some of them continue to develop sensitivities to the foods that they're eating, even when they're on, an elimination diet. So why is this happening? And this comes back to this concept of oral tolerance. And we're going to unravel the mysteries of oral tolerance. And we're going to talk about the functional medicine approach to supporting it and improving it. Oral tolerance isn't just a buzzword. It's a complex physiological process that determines how our immune system responds to the foods that we consume. At its core, it's about our body's ability to tell the difference between harmful pathogens and benign food particles. And this plays a role in our immune response, and it can be a real critical piece of the puzzle if you're trying to dampen inflammation or dampen an autoimmune condition, especially if it's being driven due to increased intestinal permeability, also referred to as leaky gut. So this is something that's really important. Now, there is something that plays a pivotal role in your oral tolerance, and these are something called short-chain fatty acids. And short-chain fatty acids are actually produced by our gut bacteria as they break down dietary fibers. And these short-chain fatty acids are called postbiotics. So you've probably heard of probiotics, which are the actual bacteria, and you've probably heard of prebiotics, which are the fibers that the bacteria consume that allow them to function and flourish. But you may not have heard of postbiotics, which are compounds that the bacteria produce as part of their metabolism. And that's what these short-chain fatty acids are, postbiotics. So in particular, butyrate, propionate, acetate, these are some key short-chain fatty acids that are vital for the maintenance and this balance within our GI tract, keeping our intestinal lining healthy and actually doing a lot of other things that are absolutely critical. Now, these short-chain fatty acids not only provide energy to our gut cells, but they also regulate inflammation and they strengthen the gut barrier. So they're incredibly important. Our gut is often termed the second brain, and for good reason. There's a two-way communication channel between our gut and our brain, and this is known as the gut-brain axis. And short-chain fatty acids are the key messengers in this communication system. They primarily act through the vagus nerve and they influence brain function, mood, and even behavior. So here's how it works. The short-chain fatty acids interact with cellular receptors, and these receptors are a pretty special type of receptor. They are on the colonic enteroendocrine L cells. I know that's a mouthful, but just remember enteroendocrine, just joking, just remember L cells. What happens is they interact with these receptors on these cells, and they cause the secretion of gut hormones. And the two that have been really studied the most are PYY and GLP-1. Now, both of these gut hormones signal to the brain through the vagus nerve and through circulation. So they can then, in turn, like as I mentioned before, influence learning, memory, and mood. So that's pretty amazing. And something that I wanted to mention as a side note, have you heard, and if you think about this, it might ring a bell, have you heard of GLP-1 in the news or anything recently? GLP-1, ringing any bells? Well, if it is, or even if it's not, here's what my point is. Have you heard of semaglutide? Okay, if you haven't heard of semaglutide, have you heard of Ozempic? Because semaglutide is a medication that's sold under the trade name Ozempic, and there's a few others as well, which you've probably heard about because it's been in the news because it's really helping people lose a lot of weight. And it works because it stimulates these GLP-1 receptors. It's called a GLP-1 receptor agonist. So it activates the cells, the little receptors, trying to keep it as simple as possible. But when GLP-1 is produced, like we mentioned that it's produced by these L cells in the gut, when it's produced and it goes into circulation, it binds to cells. And the way that GLP-1 binds to cells is it attaches to a receptor on the surface of that cell, right? So that's what a receptor is. And what these medications, what semaglutide is it is a GLP-1 receptor agonist, which means it activates them. So it's actually working partially through this pathway to generate or create some of these physiological changes that are helping people to lose weight. And it's a controversial thing the way it's working now, because I don't think it's fully understood the mechanisms of how it works, and then there's some controversy. So, but anyway, I wanted to mention that because GLP-1, I mean, it's interesting that to me it was interesting that it's stimulated the way that it is naturally through short chain fatty acid production, but also how this medication also affects it. So the point here is that really having a diverse and healthy microbiome, which are all of the microorganisms in the gut, but primarily we're talking about the bacteria here, will help to stimulate and ensure that you have a healthy and robust short chain fatty acid postbiotic production, right? Because to make these short chain fatty acids, you have to have bacteria. And so if you don't have enough bacteria, you don't have the right bacteria, you might be deficient in short chain fatty acids, which is what we see whenever, I'll do with a lot of my clients that I work with. And if you didn't know this, you probably do though. I work with people across the United States and in other countries via telemedicine. And in the United States, it's pretty easy to do, but we will often order comprehensive stool panels, and we will look at intestinal health markers. And some of the intestinal health markers that we will assess are the short chain fatty acids. And you will see that when there is loss in abundance and there's loss of diversity in the GI tract microbiome, so the bacteria are low in number, low in diversity, that you often see this correlation between lower levels of these short chain fatty acids, and especially one that's really important called butyrate. So when you see a higher abundance of bacteria, more diverse bacteria, it's much more common to see higher levels of short chain fatty acids. So they're absolutely, they go hand in hand, and it makes sense, right? If the short chain fatty acids are actually produced by these bacteria, then you need to have the bacteria to make them. And if you don't, then they're probably going to be low. And so these, a healthy gut is really important for so mmany aspects of your health and physiology. If you're dealing with autoimmunity, it's one of the things that we really, really closely look into and try to optimize. And it's, you can see it's just far reaching in its impact. A healthy gut, healthy microbiome, and your good bacteria. You need to nourish that garden of microorganisms in the gut and keep them healthy, because it's a symbiotic relationship, and they are absolutely crucial for optimal brain health and development, and a healthy gut lining, and optimal gut-brain axis function. Understanding the science is just the first step. The real question is, how can we harness this knowledge to improve our health? And the first thing is, this is from my clinical experience, this is not just theoretical. The first thing we need to do is nurture the gut microbiome. And, there are a lot of dietary strategies that may be beneficial and helpful. I'm not saying this is the only way, and I'm not saying that this way will work for everyone. But I can tell you that working with a lot of people that have autoimmune diseases, and where we're trying to restore and improve to the best of our ability oral tolerance, so that the immune system is not reacting to everything, and we're not getting this persistent activation of the immune system every time the person eats a food. The strategy that I'm going to share with you has been shown to work in most of the people that I work with to some degree. Now, there are absolutely other dietary strategies that I'm really interested in that I think are going to be beneficial too. And when it comes down to like nutritional sciences and whatnot, you get people that are, really hardcore one way or the other on what's right or wrong. And I'm just going to tell you that there's no, the science is not settled on dietary strategies and interventions. But I can tell you that it's really like what is working too, what works for you. And I'm granted, I have not tried everything I with the people that I work with, and personally also. But for me as an individual, and for a lot of the people that I've worked with to improve these autoimmune conditions, and also to help people optimize their health, the strategy that tends to work is that we need to nurture the gut microbiome, and doing so with a diverse diet that has a lot of different plant fibers, and I mean a high variety of plant fibers, really helps to promote the growth of these beneficial bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids. And then if you can get the bacteria in the gut to make sufficient short-chain fatty acids, you end up with a scenario where you can get a lot of these benefits that we've been talking about. Now, there are a lot of different strategies, and really the strategy that I personally like the most, I don't always start my clients off on this approach, because it can be a little bit aggressive for some people. It just depends on where you are, and everyone's different, so you have to try to figure out a strategy that's best for that individual. But me personally, what I like to do is I like to eat a diet that has a lot of these plant fibers. You want diversity in fiber. Think of it this way. The more diverse your diet is, the more diverse your gut microbiome is going to be. So if you eat the same foods, very narrow, very limited number of foods every day, if you don't have a lot of color and diversity in there, you're not going to have a lot of diversity in your gut bacteria. And so the more diverse, the more diversity you have in bacteria. And then the more of those things that you tend to eat, the larger quantities over time or throughout the day, typically you build in abundance of the gut bacteria as well. So the dietary strategy that I personally like, and this is a little bit, again, I'll share with you what, like for my clients, what I will often use. But for me personally, I like to follow a diet that is higher in fruits and that has a lot of animal-based proteins in them. And I like to load and eat my largest meals early in the day. So my largest meal is breakfast. My the second largest meal is at lunch, and then my smallest meal is at dinner. And I like to work out in the morning in a fasted state, and then I like to have breakfast, and I like to have a lot of protein, good fats with that, and then I like to eat a significant amount of colorful fruits. And this is the reason that I actually prefer fruits over vegetables, is because it seems like that the fruit has less of these plant-based defense chemicals in them. And you see that there tend to be more of these plant-based defense chemicals in the leaves, the stems, the roots of plants. And for me personally, I've tried a ton of different dietary strategies, and I've eaten all of those different parts of plants, and I've eaten real high fiber diets and tried different things for me as an individual. And what tends to work is I can eat more fruit that's high in fiber, so I'm getting prebiotics, very diverse in color. And then so I get these flavonoids, these compounds that are also prebiotics that feed diversity of the bacteria that I have colonizing my gut. And then I get the protein in, and I put that right after my workout. So, when I work out, I'm usually doing strength training or cardiovascular conditioning. And when I'm finished working out, I've depleted a lot of the glycogen and the glucose. My blood sugar's lower, so my body is primed. It's very insulin sensitive because I've been fasting overnight. I've maybe had some coffee prior to exercise and water, but really nothing else. So I haven't put any carbohydrates in. So I'm very insulin sensitive after that workout. My body's primed to use those carbohydrates. So that's when I like to eat them and eat, consume fruit at that time. And then I'll still have fruit like at lunch. And I may have, typically more of a lower carb, protein and fat based diet or meal near dinner, and that works really really well for me. I've just seen that my body does not do well with nightshade, the nightshade family, which are peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, white potatoes. I tend to not do well with those at all. I don't do well personally with legumes and a lot of these other foods that, are high in fiber and proteins, and some people do great with them. But for me as an individual personally, that's one of the things those are things that just I don't do as well with. I don't feel as good. And I've tried, lots of variations, and worked on increasing the fiber intake and introducing the food slowly and giving my gut time to change. Those are all things that have to be considered. But for me as an individual, that's what works well. And I think it has to do with the lower amounts of these plant defense chemicals, which, I don't want to digress too far into this discussion, but the plant defense chemicals are actually the things that are, in the leaves and the stems and the roots and whatnot, are actually the things that in a lot of the research have been shown to be, somewhat beneficial. And that's because a lot of these plant defense chemicals are actually just a very weak type of toxin that when we eat it, it stimulates our liver enzymes and ramps up liver enzyme activity because it's think of it like a low dose toxin. And so it's a, believed to create a hormetic effect. You're eating it, it's stimulating enzyme activity, and it ramps up these enzymes that are detoxification enzymes that will help to clear potentially other things that you're being exposed to in your day-to-day life out of your body as well. So it's believed to be like this hormetic or effect through hormesis. And, for me, that is something that sounds great, but again, in practice and when you implement it, it depends on how you feel and how you're functioning. So I would rather just not consume those things if I can, and if I can still get benefits. So I do really well with that type of diet. Now, with my clients, what I just encourage is, again, a diverse diet with a lot of different plant-based fibers and definitely with sufficient protein, but it's not the primary thing that we're talking about or that needs to be in the discussion when we're discussing how do we increase short-chain fatty acids. It's really the diversity in fiber and in colors when we're talking about that. But so for my clients, what I'll often do, especially when I'm working with someone that's autoimmune, is I'll usually give them a dietary strategy that is closer to what I would call like an autoimmune type of paleo diet that removes a lot of the commonly inflammatory foods that we've seen over the years that contribute to increased immune reactivity. And this is also, there's some research and stuff out there that supports this, but removing those foods for at least, using it like as an elimination diet and kind of teaching them a different way to eat tends to be a really good strategy. So they'll eat, plenty of proteins. They'll eat, they'll eat good fruits, low glycemic fruits. They'll eat all kinds of vegetables and stuff. So it's not the same diet that I have adopted, but it's a great strategy that most people really do well with. And then what I also like to do is take a version of that and have them use either like a slow cooker approach or like an Instant Pot approach, where you cook meals and through the process of pressure cooking or slow cooking, you're only eating foods that tend to be lower in antigens, things that would stimulate the immune system. Plus, you're kind of pre-digesting them by subjecting them to heat and pressure, or just slow heat over time. And that breaks down a lot of these anti-nutrients that might be in there, some of the compounds like lectins. And so it's a similar concept of like soaking and draining beans and whatnot to rinse and break down some of these compounds that can be can be irritating and harmful to our gut. So that's a good strategy, and that's something that can be really helpful at supporting healing the gut and getting better GI tract bacteria. I also like to personally, and also in my dietary recommendations to my clients, I like to recommend, and again, it's all individualized. When you talk to someone, if they say, I do terrible with fermented foods, and I'm not going to recommend this, but I personally consume, and I like to recommend the consumption of kimchi if possible. Now, if there's a nightshade issue, you can get like what's called like a white kimchi that doesn't have the nightshades. But like kimchi, kefir, if there's a dairy issue, and there's a dairy issue with casein or lactose, then I probably wouldn't do this. You can get other types of kefir, like coconut kefir, but the dairy kefir and kimchi, and also sauerkraut, these can be fantastic ways to re-inoculate the gut with a lot of diverse bacteria. It doesn't take a ton, so you don't have to use like necessarily probiotics as a supplement. You can actually get it from food, which is the ideal way to do it, I think. But not everyone can tolerate those things, and it really depends on the person on exactly the strategies that I would recommend. But if it's doable, you want to get those things in your diet. Now, I'll say this, like I just said, I don't typically do the leaves and the stems, but sauerkraut, it's cabbage. Kimchi has all kinds of different vegetables, but it's fermented, it's broken down, and it seems to be much better and easier to digest. So I'll do that, and I'll even do brining, which I'll just drink a little bit of, maybe an ounce or so of like the sauerkraut brine every day or every other day or so. And I'll probably have like I would say a quarter of a cup of kefir, unsweetened, unflavored kefir. So it's kind of like this runny sour cream. It actually tastes kind of good. And I know it's great for me, and it does. I notice a difference. So doing those things daily as well help to really improve and remodel the gut bacteria. And then the GI tract lining, it helps to support them significantly. And then what I'll do is, now if it's someone I'm working with initially and we're trying to improve their gut health, then I'll use things like targeted supplementation to also support this. That's a more of a shorter term intensive strategy to kind of put a lot of things together at once to really try to get some real significant outcome and improvements. So those are some of the things I'll do. And so, and for people that have really compromised gut health, like we know that their gut's a real issue, I'll even recommend short chain fatty acid supplementation so that we can increase those levels really in the short term and make some pretty rapid improvements. And most of the time that works well too. And then the last thing is that intermittent fasting can also be a really helpful tool to help give the gut a little bit of time to rest, and that helps it to restore and recover a bit more. And that really, those things together tend to enhance oral tolerance pretty significantly. If you found this episode helpful, please share and leave a review. It really helps the podcast.
And as always, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can also follow us on YouTube and Facebook at the Office of Dr. Brad Shook. You can join our Facebook group, the Greater Hickory Thyroid Support Group with over 11,000 members, and you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Brad Shook. And remember, together, we can make a difference.
As we wrap up this episode, remember that our health is a complex interplay of a lot of different systems and physiological processes and inputs from our environment. And as you learn more, you can better understand and respect these processes, and that will get you closer to achieving the health that you desire. Before we go, I'd like to leave you with a quote from Winston Churchill. Success is not final and failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. And this quote's a reminder that every step in our journey and every challenge is an opportunity to learn and grow. So until next time, continue learning, keep pushing forward. See you next time, everybody.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed hanging out behind the scenes with Dr. Shook. You can also talk with and learn from Dr. Shook through Facebook Live on our Facebook page at the Office of Dr. Brad Shook. Don't forget, you can also get access to our videos, guidebooks, and thyroid programs at www.drbradshook.com. Oh yeah, and don't forget one more thing. We can change the world one person, one family, and one community at a time. Until next time, remember, today is your day, and no one will tell you who you are and what you can be.